Hello and welcome to Views on News. I'm Jawad Tehami. In today's program, we are going to talk about Indian Army Chief General Manoj Pandey's remarks. The recent remarks he has just given regarding China. He has said that China seeks to replace the US as the global net security provider based on the policy of might is right. He also said that pockets of dispute happen to be there along the border with China and India, and they have a potential to escalate into a wider conflict. And he has at the same time accused People Liberation Army of the transgressions and the violations of the agreements and the protocols between China and India. He has also said Indian Army has carried out rebalancing of its forces to counter China on the northern border, and Indian Army has adequate reserves. We have also seen in the recent past the skirmishes happening between the personnel of People's Liberation Army as well as Indian Army, and the bloodiest of these skirmishes was back in June 2020 in Galwan Valley, where 20 Indian soldiers and 4 Chinese soldiers lost their lives. We have also earlier seen that India raised its defense budget, and also its cabinet approved raising 7 new battalions along the China border, as well as deploying 120 tactical missiles along the border with China and Pakistan. In today's program, we'll take an analysis on these statements of the Indian Army Chief, and we'll try to understand how bigger is the threat of this military design by India for the regional security and peace. And we'll also take up for discussion the mantra of the technical glitches, as we have seen in the recent past couple of days before, in fact, that the Indian Army during the drills misfired 3 missiles. And this is a not a new mantra, and we have also seen in the past when BrahMos landed in Pakistan, and the reason that was associated with that by the Indian authorities was also a technical glitch. That raises some serious questions about the India's ability and competence of its human resource to handle such type of weapon systems. And let me bring in our panelists. We are honored to have been joined in the studio by Dr. Talat Shabbir. He is Director, China-Pakistan Studies Center, Institute of Strategic Studies, Islamabad. Dr. Shabbir, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much
for being with us. We really appreciate your precious time. At the same time on Skype, we are being joined by Dr. Jamil Khan, his former ambassador. Dr. Khan, thank you very much for your time also, for being with us on Views on News tonight. We really appreciate that. Let me begin the discussion with you, Dr. Shabbir. When we take a look at this statement and the accusation by the Indian Army Chief regarding the transgressions along the line of actual control, he has put the blame on the Chinese army, the People's Liberation Army. Do you think this particular statement and the accusation carries any sort of weight?
Yeah, I think this is the time that probably this statement of Army Chief speaks of frustration that they have, and they have now, I think, have to reconcile with the fact that China is asserting in the region as a regional power as well as on the globe as a global power. There are 2 developments before I comment on the statement by Army Chief. You know, there is a phenomena of China-US competition when we look at the globe. Regionally, I think India-China competition also is intensifying because in China has to have the regional influence also before it actually claims a global influence. This is very important from the perspective of China. Now, we have seen, as you have referred in your intro, that there were problems in 2020 in Galwan Valley. There's a line of actual control where the forces can push each other to claim territory. So there was a lot being done on the borders. China was very cautious when we observed in 2020. They were very cautious, and probably they wanted to push Indian Army to a point where they think it's enough. And they never wanted to escalate. But given the fact that Indian Army also tries to claim areas in Galwan Valley and across Ladakh border, so there is a problem between the two forces. No, it's not just a tactical problem. I think very bigger front. India also wants to assert its influence in the region, and China is of course a big hurdle in that regard. When a chief of army staff of a country gives a statement, particularly in the Indian Army, I think this statement has backing of the whole government. And I think this speech of his to a think tank was vetted by the Ministry of Defense and the Indian government. So it's a deliberate attempt to declare, in my view, declare frustration that Indian Army or India has.
So is it a sort of a provocative statement also?
Yeah, it is, definitely it is. And of course, it is an acceptance of our reconciliation with the fact that China is now a power that is actually creating problem for India and it's a kind of hurdle for India to expand its regional influence. So this is the development that I see, that India and China competition in the region is intensifying. So when he talks, there are two developments with regards to China. When we say, China mediated Iran and Saudi Arabia deal, and Xi Jinping, when he was to take over his third term, he visited Russia. Now that actually tells us what the China has on mind, and what actually Xi Jinping, as the third term president, wants to convey, not only to the global powers but to the region, that they can create a kind of influence globally as well as regionally.
So a very important and pertinent point that you've just highlighted. A certain statement by Indian Army Chief related to that particular aspect has also been given. I'll come to that to take your detailed view on that. Also, Dr. Khan, when we talk about this accusation by Indian Army Chief on the People Liberation Army of transgressing and violating all the agreements and protocols regarding the border between India and China, do you think it carries any sort of a weight? And do you consider such type of remarks and statements happen to be responsible from the Army Chief of India?
Well, such statements as it was being discussed, coming from an army chief, and that too from Indian Army, that is normally vetted quite well and quite well researched. Now, I would look at it from the political and geostrategic point of view, and I would look such moves and such statements, such as this statement of Mr. Pandey, the chief of the Indian Army. I would say that if whatever is boiling in this area in terms of in terms of competition, China and US, in terms of the agreements which has been signed between India and US, in terms of competition with China, by having an agreement of AUKUS, by having Quad. So I'll just have at the back of my mind before I make further comments on it. Now, if we have these indicators at the back of our mind, we would probably reach to some kind of a conclusion that India is posturing, and India is posturing with, of course, with whatever strength they have got in terms of all the indicators which I just mentioned, and also in terms of their very close collaboration in the defense exchange and defense manufacturing and satellite research and the intelligence sharing. So India, perhaps they know it quite well that where China stands. China has an army of about 20 million plus, whereas India has only 1.6 million army. So, and then if we compare it with the budget, it's about India budget is about 10 times less than China's budget in terms of the dollars. In terms of dollar, they are much lower. So comparing army, which is with India with China, it probably would not be that plausible, because India has only $72.6 billion budget, whereas China has $24 billion budget. And with the collaboration of Russia and China, they have taken an edge in the space supremacy or space weaponization. So, if any future adventure by India knows where do they stand. That's one aspect. But India perhaps feel that by showing by posturing in the manner which they are trying to, particularly showing that they have a direct threat on the uh, actual line of control, and there could be an escalation of the war with China in future. And China, they are posing China as their rival and enemy in terms of the territory. And Chinese, on the other hand, are not in a mood to unnecessarily create this or unnecessarily go into this kind of skirmishes or the war, because China is already becoming gradually, and they have already attained their stature in the region, and they are gradually attaining their stature of a world leader in the world also. So they would like to have some space. The Chinese would like to have some space. They would not like to get involved into Taiwan unnecessarily, although they have drawn the red line. They have drawn the red line on the line of actual control also, and they have said that 1880 agreement with the Britishers, that agreement, and according to that agreement, they would have the they would have the border control, which is about more than 3,600 kilometers. So all these factors, if we have in our mind, then these posturing by and the statements like the one which we are discussing now of Mr. Pandey, these are basically to gain maximum from the US and its allies. And while we are discussing that, we also know that India is part of the Spring of Alliance. India is a member of Quad. India indirectly is also supporting a cause because of their allies. So if they don't do that, they don't get that much of advantage. And India is taking maximum advantage both on the trade side, the military side, the military exchange of manufacturing of various technologies. So they are they are trying to gain maximum advantage of their alliance. Happens
Right,
in
Dr. Jameel Khan, your
if there
point
is
is
any
well taken.
skirmishes between
Let me
India
go
and
to Dr. Shabbir. I'll come back to you for certain other points to be discussed with you. Dr. Shabbir, when we talk about line of actual control, in this age of advanced technology, why does it remain to be loosely demarcated as of yet?
No, the line of actual control means that anybody who is actually physically occupying the territory, it belongs to the occupier. Okay. So that is the concept of line of actual control. In fact, that is what is the problem, that when Indian Army advances in some areas around Ladakh or anywhere else, because there is certain line of actual control territory which is they border with Pakistan also. So that is loosely, as you said, is demarcated, because I think it is yet to be decided about that line, which is line of actual control. And it's I think this is a point for provocation also, because that wherever you sit on the line of actual control, it belongs.
Is there any sort of international mechanism to define that boundary?
Actually, this was decided mechanism by international law. So certain area was controlled as line of control, certain area was because line of control you can't cross. Line of control is demarcated, but line of actual control, where probably demarcation was not possible, or it was left to this final settlement of the issue. So that remains a bone of contention, and particularly for both the forces who are sitting eyeball to eyeball and trying to look for area where they can sit. But given that fact, when we say that certain areas are occupied Chinese People's Liberation Army and certain areas are occupied by Indian Army. Now, in Galwan in 2020, what happened was that Indian Army tried to push forward. So in the Chinese calculation, I think they knew till what point they can come ahead. So beyond which, and then PLA retaliated, and they pushed them back. Now you must have seen the various videos also coming from that, because they can't use weapon there, and there are 3 or 4 protocols also signed for engagement in those areas. So, but it is a bone of contention for both the armies, and it is because the territories are undecided, unsettled in that area. So it's, I think, anybody who is powerful or anybody who has opportunity to capture an area territory.
So doesn't it increase the risks when there are two nuclear powered neighbors? They are contesting for certain territory.
Yes, I think it is a problem. It's a big problem. It is even between India and Pakistan, where line of actual control, and we have, you know, these territories undecided and unsettled. Of course, we were looking for permanent solution to these problems, and that is what is, you know. And my sense is that China actually does not, you know, bother much about what is happening on. They are actually for in a bigger design. They are not actually focusing on Galwan or Indian Army, or they have bigger design in the world. So I think this actually kind of create friction between the two countries, and it creates tension between the two countries. And last time when in 2020 when they had scuffles, so it also somewhat affected their trade, though for a very brief period, but it affected their trade. But then they realized that it's not, I think, to, you know, make it a point. So they got back to their trade as usual, but the problem is still there. And when we talk of this line of actual control, so this line of actual control will continue to be a problem for both the countries till such time it is resolved.
Let me take Dr. Jamil Khan's view on this particular thing. Dr. Khan, why is this line of actual control still loosely demarcated between the two nuclear armed neighbors?
They have not gone beyond the agreement between Britishers and Chinese of 1890, what I was mentioning, because that was a temporary demarcation, loosely marked borderline, which is about more than 3,400 something kilometers. So since that was not settled, both countries have not agreed to a structured survey. Both countries are claiming the territory. You know, the Indians, what they call Anu, Chinese, they call it part of the Tibet. So there are claims on these territories, and what I'm mentioning, this agreement of 1890 between Britishers and Chinese, that has details about it, and Indians are not agreeing on and they say that since Britishers had gone, so this agreement is no more valid, and therefore this skirmishes would continue. So answer to your question is that unless there is a mutually agreed survey mechanism or under some third party arrangements, this seems to be a continuous problem and continuous bone of contention between two nuclear powers. But
So
then
is there
Pakistan
any
is
sort
also
of a
affected.
mechanism under the United Nations to deal with such a matter?
Absolutely, the General Assembly, both countries, they can ask the General Assembly or the Security Council, for that matter, to decide this dispute by invoking Chapter 6 of the United Nations Charter. Or I don't think the India or China they would agree to Chapter 7, but Chapter 5 and Chapter 6, the Charter of the United Nations, they could be invoked by the other member by the members of the Security Councils, and then the implementation becomes binding on both the countries. But if we take an example of the state of Malacca, if we take the example of the territories in the South China Sea, then in that case, that probably would also not be resolved because China would not agree to such demarcation, which in the United Nations, under its universal law for the high seas, they had tried to do it with China, and China did not agree with it. So it appears that this is going to continue for quite some time. And Indians, they also understand if they don't have the support. I only wish that they don't have a support like Ukraine and try and do so any adventure with China, because that would be a very devastating factor. But otherwise, in terms of men, in terms of material, in terms of equipment, India is way behind China. And as I was saying, that China has obtained that capability. China has obtained the space weaponization capability. Even the United States, they are showing their concern about such a capability of China, and particularly once Chinese and Russians, they have their joint space centers in the space. So all these factors, if we bear in our mind, India quite well understands that if they go and if they escalate any such tension, who would be the sufferer? Because even in 1962, once there was a full-fledged war between India and China, 80,000 Indians were killed as against only 1,600 Chinese. So they know what kind of damages could be caused. And China now is much more advanced than what it was in 1962 as compared to India's advancement. So, but that, what I was saying in the last segment also, that Pakistan is also quite impacted with, because this kind of actual control or Jammu and Kashmir, if we view that, so these territories are quite volatile territories in terms of what we are discussing. Now, Daulatpur is about 8 miles only from Punjab top, and which is so close. If the skirmishes goes on and if it escalates to a war, then Pakistan obviously would automatically drop that
So
into.
how high are the chances, Dr. Jameel Khan, how high are the chances of these little skirmishes happening along the border between India and China turning into a wider conflict?
The skirmishes can start, but then there is no end to it basically, and it can just flare up even accidentally. Although China, as I was saying, would like to avoid until it attains its supremacy in the world arena, as they are really progressing very fast. But the geopolitical development around the world and in the region, it indicates that the containment and the competition between China and the United States, that would be the main dictating factor. That would be the main driving factor, even in this region, which is the line of actual control between India and China. So, whatever we discuss in the context of India and China, and the chances of its aggravating and escalating, we'll have to view it in the geopolitical and geostrategic situation and the posturing of US and its allies, and on the other side, China, Russia, and the remaining members of their allies. So, what I don't
Right, Dr.
foresee.
Jameel Khan, there is a statement by General Manoj Pandey regarding this particular great power rivalry between the US and China. He says that that is currently playing out and it is influencing the bilateral ties between Delhi and Beijing. Also, I'll take your view on this particular statement also, the things that you've just also mentioned yourself. Dr. Shabbir, your take regarding this particular statement, the great power rivalry between the US and China. Don't you think there should be a realization among the Indian authorities that if their bilateral relationship with China, a major power in the region, is being influenced because of that great power rivalry between the US and China, so there must be some sort of a maturity shown by the Indian authorities towards China and its bilateral relations with it?
You see, one of the aspects of the power rivalry between China and the US is that India is being projected as net security provider for the US. India is being projected as the protector of a US interest in the region. So many scholars, I happen to meet few scholars in America, Indian scholars, who do not like to be projected as China's enemy in the region, because they want to have good relations with the Chinese in the neighborhood with China. The US and China's rivalry has of late, you see, there are statements coming from President Xi Jinping, who have given a stern warning to the United States that don't suppress us, don't try to contain us. And we expected a similar kind of statement by the foreign minister of China, who happened to be the ambassador in US before this assignment. He was also very stern in giving warning to US. So there's a real rivalry. But as a student of international politics and China watcher, I believe that China will try to, with regards to India as well as US, try to exercise strategic constraint as far as possible, because China is not looking at confrontation at the moment, because China is actually focusing on economy, actually focusing on technology, artificial intelligence, and various other things with regards to development. China is also trying to bring in the world in their own fold. For example, Belt and Road Initiative, and I sometimes say that there are a lot many initiatives that China is brings every now and then.
So regarding the first part, if China is not willing to go into a direct conflict, neither with India nor with the US, so what about the Indian side vis-a-vis China?
So that is what I say. India should India should not be provocative. India should try to exercise its better sense and see that it's peace in the region that actually suits India. It's not confrontation and conflict. That is why I say scholars from India and certain scholars from America, they think that confrontation with China is not a solution. It's communication. It is engagement with China, which is more important than confrontation. But since in our region, for example, it is not in the interest of Pakistan that India and China, though certain people say it's it's better that our enemy is engaged by our friend. So I think it is if Indians are wise, they won't go for a confrontation with China, because China is far superior than Indian Army faces a lot of problems with regard to their equipment, with regard upgrading of their equipment in the army. They have certain equipments. Reports say that around 30% of Indian Army's equipment is obsolete. So they have to modernize the army. At this moment, I think General Pandey gave a statement against China, but General Pandey knows also that it's not fit for Indian Army to go for an open conflict with Chinese army, because they're far superior and far more better equipped than Indian Army.
So what about the other economic side? I mean, when it comes to Belt and Road Initiative, don't you think Indian authorities have the realization of the regional connectivity could bring more prosperity and development, not only in the region but also for their peoples also?
I think that is the one realization. That is what I always say, that it's China has been forthcoming in bringing economy, connectivity, shared future, common destiny. So nice things that China talks about, and they're good for the people of the region, the whole bigger region. So if for instance CPEC, I always consider that if India comes to terms with Pakistan on CPEC, so connectivity will benefit not only Pakistan but India also. So for regional connectivity. And one more thing, China wants peace in its periphery. China does not want confrontation in the periphery. If China wants to have BRIs to be successful, if China wants global development initiative to be successful, global security initiative to be successful, or global civilization, the recent initiative they have taken to be successful, if they do not have peace in the periphery.
Right. Dr. Jamil Khan, your take regarding this statement by Indian Army Chief that the great power rivalry currently playing out between China and the US is influencing bilateral ties between India and China. Shouldn't there be a realization among Indian authorities that to tow the interests of the United States, if there happens to be a confrontation with a regional power here, that is China, it's going to be detrimental for India itself?
That's right. In fact, India has the quadrilateral abroad, and also, as I was mentioning, that there were joint manufacturing of aircraft parts and joint manufacturing of other military armaments and equipment, technology. So India, that is on one hand, and second, India was able to enhance its trade and commerce with the United States and its allies. Second highest partner, second biggest partner of India is the second biggest partner of the United States. Besides that, India definitely would like to dominate this region, and they need some help. and that they if they collaborate with China, then all the investment which India and US have made on each other, and then overall plan, the game plan of the world order, in which the number one foreign policy of the United States now is the containment of China. So if we look at it from in that background, then it doesn't seem that what people are thinking and what think tanks are thinking and what the scholars of India are thinking, it's not necessarily that the government would toe that line. Government has already government is doing a strategic a plan which they have, the Indian government has, and then the US government has. China has, as was being discussed, China does not want to have unnecessary conflict and unnecessary any war with any country. But China has already in very clear terms, they have drawn their red lines once it comes to Taiwan. They have drawn the red line once it comes to South China Sea and the state of Malacca. They have already issued their warning to the United States and its allies that nuclear weaponization through the submarines, nuclear submarines, by way of agreement, military agreement between US, UK, and Australia. So once you look at these things, and if United States have to weigh, and they are weighing, of course, to what extent they can go, because United States, they still have a biggest military budget in the world, and they are they to military edge, because military budget of United States now is about 773 billion bill which has been presented to the Congress, at least the demand of this year, and it appears that they will get this much of amount. So what does it mean as against the total defense budget of 224 of China billion dollars in terms of dollars? So that is the wide gap. But China, as I was saying, that they have been able to attain edge in certain other technologies like space supremacy, space weaponization, and then collaboration with Russia. There are certain things Russians, they had a higher technologies, and Chinese collaboration with it. That's what is being discussed in the United States by their think tanks and by their military minds. That both countries, China and Russia together, they have started taking edge. Any future war or is going to be decided on account of who is more powerful in terms of space. So if China and Russia are attaining power, then this would not matter much whether 773 billion on the military expenditure by the United States would not really be that much effective and effective on this. So a lot of things are changing. China 5G, China artificial intelligence. So many things are changing that I don't think the Indian think tanks and Indian thinkers what they are thinking, and they are thinking right, because India is also a member of SCO, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which fundamentally emphasizes on the connectivity of this bloc. But does the other side, the other part of the world power, that's the United States and its allies, would they like that? That this bloc becomes so strong and India becomes a part of it, and China, India, and all this bloc, this could flourish. This could be a very prosperous region. But because of this competition, who is going to be the world leader? Who is going to continue to be dominating the world? China is having a supremacy on their manufacturing since 2010, and they are the largest. And since 2013, they are the largest trading country of the world. So, and the BRI, we have already discussed that with their BRI advantage and the way they have been able to have a soft diplomacy and the development, it appears that China would not like any confrontation in this region or elsewhere directly.
Right.
But if the red line is crossed, China would have no option but to jump into it.
Dr. Shabbir, when we talk about another statement by Indian Army Chief, he says that China is seeking to replace the US as the global net security provider, believing in the policy of might is right. Firstly, what does it specifically mean? And isn't it contrary to the facts and the recent developments as China being the peace broker and the peacemaker in the region also, when we talk about the agreement between Iran and Saudi Arabia recently?
Yes, when we say, the war basically between China and US is war of supremacy, we must be very clear. Speaking from the realist perspective of international politics, I think it's just a war of influence, and it's time of transition. A superpower, a sitting superpower trying to retain what it has, and a superpower trying to claim the status of being the superpower. So that is the basic competition. Then there are other components like technology, trade, artificial intelligence, and many other components of this conflict or this competition. But primarily, I think it's global supremacy that is at the heart of the policymakers and decision makers of both the countries. Now, I think Chinese people are very deep. For example, they are playing their cards very well. They keep their cards close to their chest. For example, for a couple of weeks back, it was not imaginable that Iran and Saudi Arabia could sit together. But Chinese were continuously working on this, and they managed to broker a kind of peace between the two countries. And how important it is for the region and for the globe, and how important it is for China, for us, maybe for the region, and how bad it is for Israel and for the US, this deal. Now, one that probably US never wanted to have kind of strike this kind of deal because it's not in their interest, because it's a peace deal. So China has now moral edge over the United States of America by brokering this peace deal. So China has. Secondly, the US-Ukraine war also divides the world. It divides the world in a manner that China, I think, hats off to their wisdom. He gave 12 points agenda. He went to Russia with 12 points agenda. He met Putin, and he just talked of peace and nothing else. And still it was very successful. And basically he has shown his cards. He has shown the world that how important Russia is for China at the moment, and how far they're getting together, and in the future world politics, how important Russia is for China, and similarly vice versa for China for Russia. So I think China is playing its cards very well, and for global supremacy, and for the issues that globe has at the moment, China has, I think, edge over United States of America. For example, you look back 50 years, just 50 years history, China was continuously working on economy, on making friends, on talking of nice things like peace and shared future, development, connectivity, business, trade, whereas America was actually trying to wage wars and conflicts, and so that is what differentiates the two powers. I think China in the near foreseeable future will have a moral edge over United States of America on how this world should look like. When you look at the international order driven by China, you look at benign, very peaceful international order, though there are realist interests also of the powers who are trying to be superpower. But China tries to give an impression that they are very benign power. They are very helping, caring, and they're really looking for development of people. They're really.
So this particular statement by Indian Army Chief is contradiction to that.
Of course, one that there's a realist perspective to what Indian Army. He is right, because it's first of all the power that will actually help in China to give out certain policies of peace. When there's a conflict, for example, as I said, China will exercise strategic restraint to maximum limit possible. But of course, they will try to have regional influence. They'll like to have. They will,
but
like
not
to
on
be
the policy of might is right, as Indian Army Chief says so.
At the moment, China does not give this impression. But when I say realist politics, real international politics, so it definitely might is right is very important kind of component of this whole framework. But I think China would like to give an impression that they're benevolent superpower, not a superpower which always twists arms and squeezes other countries, smaller countries.
Right, Dr. Jamil Khan, one last very important point that I just want your view on is another technical glitch that resulted in the misfire of 3 missiles during the drills by Indian Army in Rajasthan state. This mantra doesn't seem to be new, because we saw a similar sort of a mantra by Indian authorities when the Brahmas landed in the Pakistan territory. Doesn't it raise serious questions about India's ability to handle such weapon systems, and also the incompetence of the human resource associated with it? And what happens to the responsibility of international community and the concerned quarters when it comes to such type of technical glitches?
That's right, and particularly in the backdrop of the fact that the two countries have already fought 3 wars, and they have the conflict because of the Kashmir and because of other factors. And such accidents, if they call it accident, or such mistakes, if they call it mistake, the Indians, that can involve some disastrous impact, because it could be loaded with a warhead, it could cause damage to a sovereign country, and then that sovereign country under the UN Charter would have a full authority to respond to it. For example, if these missiles had caused some damage and had the warhead which had exploded some significant and some important installation. In that case, the Pakistan would have been in its rightful right to respond to it, which is contained and which is covered by the United Nations Charter. So the world has to take a note of it, and Pakistan should also raise it at all the international forum, and particularly at the level of General Assembly and the Security Council, raising the point and raising the significance of the point that these 2 countries already have the conflict, and they have been having war previously. And if such adventure or if such mistakes are taken, it can turn into a difficult situation between the 2 nuclear powers. So yes, we should take it up at all levels. Yeah.
Dr. Jamil Khan, former ambassador, thank you very much for joining in at Views on News tonight. We really appreciate your time joining us on Skype, and in the studio we were joined by Dr. Talat Shabbir, Director, China-Pakistan Studies Center, Institute of Strategic Studies, Islamabad. Thank you very much for your time, also for being with us on Views on News tonight. We really appreciate that. With that, we come to the end of today's show. Till the next one, take good care of yourselves.